There are seats up here right up front. If you'd like them, you should please come down and don't hesitate. Take them. Okay. So, in this evening's reading, Arna Moore will introduce Peg Boyers, and Mamta Chaudhry will introduce Marilynne Robinson. Arna Moore.
Oops. Good evening, everyone. I am honored to be here and honored to be introducing Peg Boyers. But first, here are a few words from Adam Phillips, the British psychoanalyst, writing in his book, Missing Out. There is always what will turn out to be the life we led and the life that accompanied it, the parallel life or lives that never actually happened, that we lived in our minds, the wished for life or lives, the risks untaken, and the opportunities avoided or unproved. It can be argued, I believe, that poets and writers manage both. The quotidian life in which one shops for groceries, puts out garbage, brushes one's teeth, goes to work, and another life altogether, the life of the imagination. While Phillips may be talking about the plumber who wishes to be a poet, the waitress who has dreams of movie stardom, the limo driver who raps on weekends, I actually met one of those, I draw here on a different tradition, the insurance executive who inhabits a world of sensual intellect, complacencies of the peignoir, the publisher who promises that the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time, Stevens and Eliot. Tonight, I introduce a poet who is by day a wife, mother, grandmother, executive editor, professor of poetry, chatelaine of an institute, but who in the early hours of morning, on autumn and winter weekends, and for 2 intense weeks each summer, thoroughly inhabits an existence of which she only dreamed before she entered it, 4 decades into an already extraordinarily rich life. A woman who has proceeded in her poems to send back bulletins from lives lived within the lives of others, from pieces of life understood through Renaissance images of the Holy Family, for instance, and from memory of her own lives in other countries, climates, and languages, to achieve, in the process, an argumentative, insistent, and original poetics. Now, in a soon-to-be-published 3rd collection, she has fashioned what might be called a memoir, even a Bildungsroman of imagination and intellect, inscribing by means of an evanescent but actual city a terrain which only the most fearless and daring would take on. When she calls her forthcoming collection to forget Venice, do not imagine for a moment she means for us to forget Venice. Rather, she directs us to let pass the misty postcard city that abuses her sense of what is true. She may warmly greet us at dinner or after a reading, but do not imagine she ever loses sight of the reality the making of poems requires. Within her writing hours, the smiling public woman vanishes. Filth disguised as ornament is how she sees her city, a place where each putrid grain of sand is embedded in sweat. In this queasy dystopia, there is no breeze in the courtyard of Palazzo Ducali, and even a beloved mother's perfume cannot obliterate the Venetian stench. John Ruskin is horrified by his bride's genitalia. Effie Ruskin writes home, "Dearest Mama, I am to eat eel." And Titian's gorgeous Magdalene testifies, but from the grave. Now my famous hair, still abundant and red, lies caked around what were my breasts. My skin's dissolved into the marsh. Hawthorn and ash wind their roots around my neck, but I don't mind. My breath's long gone. The mouth that breathed now clenches a brick stuffed between my teeth. There is a terrifying thoroughness to the poet's inventory of Venice. Like her version of Tadzio's mother, she is everywhere in gilded Ottocento mirrors dissected in 1,000 chandeliers. She speaks as an urn, as sand, as moss, and sometimes as the young woman she once was, new to this city of canals, throwing her head back to indulge a first taste of erotic confidence. He is her first Jewish intellectual. He feeds her books and talk. She learns smart is sexy. The eros of the mind thrills her. But no sooner have we taken in the girl than we see an old woman on a chaise on the Lido. It is as if happiness exacts a cost. This woman stares at the sky, imagines clouds, definition where instead there is only emptiness, blue and unforgiving. Her gold necklace leaves dents in her loose leather chest. But the poet does have moments of mercy, allowing us to forget all that and locate the city to which she still returns. We are gliding before the clouds, to my right the lighted wing, beneath it tiny lights on the lagoon. Here, with her, we are assured that even within the lives of those who must court the unlived, there are moments of necessary integration. Another day together, safe. The mirage, insist on this, is real. Please welcome Peg Boyers.
Gee, thank you. Wow, I can't even respond to that. Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming tonight. I wasn't going to read from my Venice book. I'm so bored with it, but I'm suddenly interested again. Anyway, that will come out in the fall. I will read just a few poems from it, some of which were so eloquently spoken about by Honor. I'm newly interested in them. This one is called Tadzio's Mother. So Tadzio is the object of desire in Thomas Mann's Death in Venice. So it's her voice. Too young to be a widow, too old for the beach, out of place as these upright palms propped in their terracotta pots in the hotel lobby. Everywhere my reflection framed in gilded Ottocento mirrors, dissected in 1,000 chandeliers. Multiplied, but alone. Black veil of mourning, you cover only my official grief. No garb marks the passage from fertile tree to desiccated stalk. My sons will grow and go without ritual. Last year the eldest was by my side, still a boy. Now he sulks on the promenade, plotting his escape. His furtive hand slips inside his swimsuit, controlándolo like a passport. He stalks the spiaggia, half boy, half man, perfect body glistening in the sun. Eyes of passerby drink him in, while his siblings build castles by the Capanna. My Tadzio stands apart on the pier, a handsome kurus set against the sea, waiting for sport, or better. His frail hand rises and waves, not to me, but to another guest obscured by the terrace awning. His lips part in a coy half-smile, revealing teeth thin like mine, jagged and stained, from years of indulgence, dark against his pale, idle skin. This next one is called Scirocco, Otello in Venice. This is based on a memory I had from just after I arrived in Venice in 1965. Sandy heat of summer, each putrid grain embedded in sweat. No breeze in the courtyard of Palazzo Ducale, where mother's perfume almost obliterates the Venetian stench. Powdered and scented, we ready for the open-air opera. My mother and Mario, poised between us, as winds and strings intimate the coming storm and stage lights crash over the grand marble staircase, inaugurating the season of deceit. In the dark, Mario's expert fingers forage in the folds of mother's skirt. Cymbals and drums confirm it all. We follow the Moor who in his innocence believes himself a cuckold, but is not, while my absent father in his innocence trusts and is betrayed. I am evil because I am a man, sings Iago that summer night in 1965, the Istrian stone gleaming pure under the stars. Dio crudel, keep me silent. To Iago's God I pray. Keep father safe in Sumatra, with no one to lead him to the Venetian light. My family lived in Indonesia for a while, and my father was still there. That's another story for another time. So this is a poem called Mrs. Casanova. I don't know if Casanova ever married, but this is imagining that he had a wife. So these poems are mostly sort of have a literary theme, even though this is, he wrote a famous diary, Casanova. So they all have a kind of link, even the ones that are not about Venice. She has no inner life. Instead, she will have secrets. Like him, a mask to cover them. This is the plan. Under the mask, she will dwell, keeping what is on her mind to herself. In her transparent world, secrets are hard to come by. She will have to make do with mundane matters of little consequence. About the migraine she had last night, for example, she will not speak, nor let on she is embarrassed when exposed before their guests about the several political issues she always gets wrong, the intrigues at court, the betrayals, alliances. She is embarrassed to have been embarrassed by something so trivial. She will hide that too, under the mask. Nor will she admit that she was hurt when mocked before their young friend about the songs she likes, especially when sung by that new castrato in town. She will refrain from showing how much she minds being contradicted about stupid facts like the difference between poplar and cedar, which hardly exist in Venice anyway. Her pettiness shames her, yet she feels deeply wronged. That these tiny wrongs begin to add up and weaken her is disturbing. In her weakness, she feels and is unattractive. Looking into her husband's eyes, she is confirmed. Under her mask, she notes that yes, compared to their lovely young friend, she really is a crone. A stupid, unhappy crone, disfigured by unhappiness. No wonder her husband recoils from her in this state, preferring the attentions of their lovely young friend. She too prefers their lovely young friend to her pathetic, unhappy self. Under her mask, she will hide her humiliations, and in that dark, airless place, let them fester and grow, and from that spreading rot, accumulate something like an inner life, a place in which to dwell alone, privately, in her misery. In her barren world, this sad notion of fashioning a secret place of her own passes for a creative solution, and for now consoles her. But she is not yet adept at using the mask. It will take practice and discipline to achieve the necessary mastery. When she looks in the mirror to give it a go, her harlequin reflection greets her with peals of laughter, undermining at once her determined sorrow. Perhaps tomorrow she can get serious about her plan. Try on Pierrot or Colombina, the shrewd slave. Today, she is too easily amused. A ridiculous failure, even at despair. So I'm going to change flavors now. Those are all from the book that will come out in late September. And I'm going to go to a new voice, another voice, an old voice, actually, I should say. So these are from Hard Bread. They're from the voice of the Italian writer Natalia Ginsburg. And I'll just start from a little interview that I did with her. And actually, no, I'm just going to tell you. I'm just going to go. She was a writer whose voice I appropriated for my first book. And she wrote plays and novels, and I wrote the poems I imagined she might have written. And here's a little letter from Amherst, which I imagined she might have written. She actually went to Amherst to visit her son, who was a professor, visiting professor there for a year in 1976. And she came across a certain writer. Letter from Amherst, 1976. Formal expanses surround the churches here. Insipid lawns, desolate and vast, hum with voracious mosquitoes. No crowded piazzas, no towers tangling the horizon, no markets. One lone steeple, points accusing heaven. No stones, no stucco, only stark, mortal wood, vulnerable, yet forbidding. In this town, it's the negative that's real. Absence fills out the shape of things. Emily Dickinson's stolid words haunt the landscape. Her ghost scratches the starched dress displayed in the museum, disdaining frills, modest as her pen. I always hated her frugal verses, replete with wrens and annoying honeybees, fastidiously parsing their divinity across the dainty page. Their holy industry, comical, repellent, rhyme a vice to contain ardor, meter a stingy trick to lock in feeling. I fell for the subterfuge, mistook economy for parsimony, spurned what was pared down, chiseled to fit her tiny breast. I doubted a despair so tame it answered to her call, sorrow transparent as gossamer, harsh and quiet as wind. I mistrusted a wit so nimble it could thread a spire and not be pricked. Now in this place I hear the steady measure of her line, feel its weight. Iams march diligently after meaning, beat out the boundaries of hopeless desire. pain's inexorable rhythm. The poet's work, her salvation. Busy lady, lovely insect, poor ironic fly caught in amorous translucent fossil. Grief's brittle imprint. Talia Ginsburg wrote many essays, and she had a lot of opinions. And this next poem, actually, she was kind of a sassy person, and I imagine that she read Elizabeth Bishop. So this is a poem when she addresses Elizabeth Bishop. I had actually just had a conversation with Susan Sontag, and she told me that I had no intellectual curiosity after having received the Paris Review, and I had not read the interview with her. And I revealed this to her, and she said, "What? You have no intellectual curiosity?" So anyway, so I wrote this poem. So that's what the first lines are about. Anyway, so I thought I'd read this to you. So that's what the beginning of this poem is. But anyway, the other person in the poem is Natalia Ginsburg talking about Bishop. And it's actually the inside story, and the poem referred to is At the Fish Houses, for those of you who are Bishop people. Reading Elizabeth Bishop is probably more accurately misreading Elizabeth Bishop. Laurie Goldenson. Anyway, you have no intellectual curiosity. That's what she said, my friend, the thinker. She's right. I take my hurt to poetry, but the verdict is confirmed. Guilty is charged. It's true. I hate the new. Bishop chases the unfamiliar like a Cheshire canary, compelled to know the song and eat it too. Imagine studying the tropical hummingbird, razor-bill auks and mailed armadillos, looking at nature and everywhere finding metaphor. I see a waterfall, and it remains a waterfall. A wall is a wall in Rome or Rio. Man made it, time will tear it down. The first geography is the neighborhood, the provincial, my province. Dream of home, stay at home. Explore the familiar, discover the strange. How does one marriage dissolve while another renews itself? How can a banker and a painter emerge from the same union? Is this boring? Then it's boredom I love. The underside of the uneventful, the inside of zero. Emptiness, let's face it, is underrated. This American teases with her elegiacal conditional. What might have happened had she not traveled? What she would have missed? Nostalgic, pathetic enough over real past. Why miss experience twice removed? Miss instead the life you missed by removing yourself. Willing change, willing interest with dogged persistence. And what of meaning? Did you really think, poor orphan, that the world was a classroom and history your teacher? Did you never learn years after that time at the fish house when the sea seduced you with its epiphanous language and narrative ruse? That knowledge is a rock, never flowing, never flown? Anyway. All right, this one's called Ode to Ernest, and just a few little Italian words, musical terms. Staccato, which is that rhythm that goes bum, 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 and then there's legato, which means connected. Staccato means separate. Ernest Hemingway is the American author that Natalia Ginsburg was an editor, and she was his Italian editor. And they actually did meet in 1948 to talk about his Italian translation. And they met in Paris also. So this is a poem imagining those interactions. Ode to Ernest. Too bad I wasn't a man. A man might have won your favor. But I am just a woman. Not even your kind of woman. And in the end, you were not my kind of man. That summer in Venice, I'd have come duck shooting with you in the marshes on the edge of the lagoon, across the Piave to the low country, across the river, into the trees, if invited. I'd have flown off to Spain, sat in the sombra with you at the bullfight, endured the irritating banderilleros, the idiot torero with his bloody bull's ears. But you were after bigger game and games. Always the chase, and then the letdown aftermath of triumph. Then again, the chase. Maybe I was too brainy or too ugly or just too much of an editor for you to notice my adulation. That time at Harry's in 48 when we met over proofs and revisions, you lobbied for a Guernica cover, pressed again your terms for payment. I wanted to tell you how you made my prose, cleaned it till it was lean. I composed my English sentences, rehearsed the grammar and pronunciation. Mr. Hemingway, you are to me a giant. I learn what is the world from your books. I learn what is to see from your books. Your words, they are clear, filled with light like Venezia, and limpid too as water. But you went on and on about details, and then about the old days, the Great War, canals jammed with bodies, Venetians and Austrians, face down and right side up, floating colossi, bloated and dead, the waste of it. All those stories about the waste of it. Years later in Paris, another novel, another meeting, the paperwork and then the talk, the bar-wise exuberance, penny-wise nitpicking repelled me. You were having a bad day with your bad eye. The one injured boxing at 17, the one that failed the army physical, the one tuned in to failure. I can still feel the weak eye wandering off course, while the strong eye drew me in with its furtive doubt. That strong eye kept aloof, focused on the action, got on with it. That lonely, predatory eye, always looking and loathing, stalking the world, nailing it with words, punching it out fast and clear, staccato, like you, Ernesto, disconnected, my legato. Okay, I'll read one more from this book and then a few short poems. This is about for Pier Paolo Pasolini. He was Natalia's friend. They both worked and lived in Rome. They were both very prolific writers. He was also novelist, and he also made films, which she didn't. He wrote plays. He did everything. He was also a poet, though, and she wasn't. He was gay. She was straight. He Hates, He Loves, for Pier Paolo Pasolini. My friend loves the fragrance of refuse, the stench of public urinals, and the musk of skunk, the way I love violets and hyacinths. He hates all that is feminine, delicate, soft, except when disguised as a rough embrace. My friend loves the poor, really loves them. He eats with thieves and sleeps with whores. He says they are unnatural, understand what is holy and good in life. My friend hates limits, deferential lies, the daily imposture, tact. He believes in creative, restorative indecency, the anesthesia of anonymous sex, the oblivion of a Bedouin's tent. My friend loves the bridges of Rome, their sooty marble baroque with seamy underworld friezes where he can lose himself in the verdigris surface of the Tiber, the dull shimmer of cupolas in its dirty scum. He hates the north, dim cities, paltry light, heavy industry, stalled desire. He craves sharp insinuations, the wanton curl on a boy's brow. My friend loves the South, the humid nights, hot urban days. Whatever is fetid or fermenting, he favors. The friction of pants boiling in the sun, consumed by shade. The wet chests of workers heaving by the docks. He inhales their sweat like incense, breathes in the sacral purity of their scent. My friend fears his lover's wife, hates pretending he loves her to keep his lover near. When they meet, he kisses her powdered cheeks. This is his compromise, his cross. My friend loves to stroll along the embankment in Trastevere, pausing at the parapet to sniff the nape of an insolent neck, the sulfur stink of hair glazed with too much brilliantine. He loves to gaze at the virile bulge of crotch, buttocks, and muscle, the sheen of worn denim. He hates the charade of romance, indulges the inverse chastity of refused attachment. He hates and loves, loves and hates, hates the loving, loves the hating. He loves what I hate his loves. He loves men, I love him. So I'll just close with a few very, very short poems from my last book. These are some of those Holy Family poems that Honor talked about. They're from a series called Deposition, and the sense of that is the bringing down from the cross of the body of Christ. But they're also mixed up with my own family. Naturally, we're a very holy family. Before losing you at the market, finding you at the temple, in the temple. Summer nights at the souk, jugglers and hucksters, vendors boiling at their stands. The three of us, hand in hand. Cranky from the heat. My grip on you would loosen, and you'd break away, and come back, then be off again, appraising the tchotchkes, chatting at merchants. You were like that, affable beyond reason, little god enrobed in light, diving into the crowd, riding it like a wave. And we, the pathetic shore, awaiting you, diminished by every foray, consoled by the returns, until we were the thinnest sliver of beach imaginable. And you were the sea. Annunciation. In our version, your father kneels beside me on the receding checkered tiles, waiting to receive the news. You float before us, raiment billowing, your long boyhood curls blonde and bright as lightning. I'm praying the usual prayer, something about protecting you from illness or danger. Your words travel their diagonal trajectory like a bullet into my ear, through my brain, into my bloodstream. My womb quickens. What was only dread has taken up residence. I am not full of grace. I am not blessed among women. Pietà. This time the migraine came with a vision, bathed in night sweat. I was sitting on the Eames chair, your man's body on my lap, legs and arms white as caseine, draped over mine, spilling onto the cassock. New sores on your legs, dried blood on your feet and hands. From your chalk mouth, the words, forgive me. From mine, the impossible, no. And this last one I'll read is called Deposition. And you just have to know the Wyoming sky that presides over the scene is the one which presided over the fate of Matthew Shepard, the young gay man who was crucified on a fence in Wyoming a few years ago. Deposition. I am in the foreground, in mid-swoon, still reeling. Red cloak blown open in the sudden storm. Darkness obscures the horizon, and behind me, a construction site. Men on a ladder, the fence which became your cross, and behind the fence a church spire, blessing nothing. The sword I have always known would pierce my heart, cuts through me. The young corpse slung over your father's friend and namesake is yours. The pasty boy flesh stark against the weathered arms bearing you is yours. My women friends are all named Mary. They lean into me, murmuring Aramaic consolations. Bent in sorrow, they catch my fall. A column of light pans the scene from above. The vast Wyoming sky bursts with a waterless electric rain. The Palladian arch framing the scene contains my grief. That's how I know. This is a dream. Thank you.
In this very hall, on a night much like tonight, Marilynne Robinson first read from her long-awaited second novel. And like all those who were present, I have never forgotten the thrill of that reading. Almost 10 years later, it still seems as if a great beam of light had swept through this space. To call Gilead incandescent is to respond to Marilynne Robinson's own attentiveness to the quality of light. As the Reverend John Ames writes in the novel, I was struck by the way the light felt that afternoon. I have paid a good deal of attention to light, but no one could begin to do it justice. But Marilynne does do justice to the quality of light through the prism of language. In her collection of essays, When I Was a Child, I Read Books, she talks about the enormous number of English words that describe the behavior of light. Glimmer, glitter, glister, glisten, gleam, glow, glare, shimmer, sparkle, shine, and so on. They are not utilitarian. They reflect an aesthetic attention to experience that has made and allows us to make pleasing distinctions among, say, a candle flame, the sun at its zenith, and the refraction of light by a drop of rain. Marilynne's own language is characterized by both exactitude and lucidity, while at the same time shimmering with a deep mystery. As John Ames writes to his son, the moon looks wonderful in this warm evening light, just as a candle flame looks beautiful in the light of morning. Light within light. It seems to me to be a metaphor for the human soul, the singular light within that great general light of existence. For illuminating the human condition with such grace and intelligence in her fiction, Marilynne Robinson has won numerous awards, including the PEN/Faulkner Award, the Pulitzer Prize, the National Book Critics Circle Award, the Orange Prize, and degrees honoris causa from various universities, including an honorary doctorate from Skidmore College. And last year, she was awarded the National Humanities Medal by President Barack Obama, who said, "Your writings have fundamentally changed me, I think for the better. Marilynne, I believe that." Musing about the loveliness of the world as he is on the verge of leaving it, John Ames writes to his son, "This is an interesting planet. It deserves all the attention you can give it." As Simone Weil once said, attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. In Marilynne Robinson, we find both attention and generosity combined to an extraordinary degree, and the liberality of her vision inspires us to be better readers, better writers, better leaders, better people, to recognize that to be human is to be connected inseparably to one another. And so tonight, Marilynne returns here to read from her eagerly awaited new novel coming out this fall. Lila is the story of John Ames's young wife who appears in his life and in his church on a rainy Pentecost as he is giving a sermon about light, or light with a capital L. And indeed, her coming brings to an end the loneliness and sorrow of a long and deep darkness, with a late love so unexpected, so radiant, as to seem very like grace itself. Lila, too, has known her own years of darkness, living in the shadows, always poor, often alone. With Lila, we return to territory made so palpable by the novels Gilead and Home that to find ourselves there once more feels like a sort of homecoming, one which combines a sense of dear familiarity with a sense of awed discovery, just as when John Ames, in describing the splendor of a certain dawn, transcends the beautiful to become sublime. But it has all been one day, he says, that first day. Light is constant. We just turn over in it. It is, in fact, Marilynne's great gift to make us feel at home not only in a fictional town, but also in the boundless universe. Please welcome Marilynne Robinson.
Thank you very much. All this glory she wraps me in. This is for Mamta also. I'm going to read from Lila. This is the first time I've read from the book in public, a sort of Skidmore tradition, I think. The section that I will read is the moment that I wrote about in Gilead, where she proposes to John Ames. Lila says, "You ought to marry me." And this sort of follows along from what happens about that. It's Lila is the voice speaking. I wonder how many. I try to explain to myself why I have to keep going back to these people. It's because they keep talking to me. What can I say? There are things people need, and the things that people don't need. That might not be true. Maybe they don't need existence. If you took that away, everything else would go with it. She's learned that word from John Ames, of course. So if you don't need to exist, then there is no reason to think about other things you don't need as if they didn't matter. You don't need somebody standing beside you. You don't, but you do. Take away every pleasure, but you couldn't, because there can be pleasure in a sip of water, a thought. There was no reason for Doan to tie a ribbon on Marcel's wrist, and that was why she laughed when he did it and loved him for it, why they all loved them both. There was no reason, to let an old man dip his hand in water and touch it to your forehead as if he loved you the way people do who would touch your face and your hair? You'd have thought those babies were his own. All right, she thought, all right. She has a letter from him, and I'll read a little bit of it. I have worried that you might think I did not take your question as seriously as I should have. She has showed up at his house one morning and said, tell me why things happen the way they do. I realize I have always believed there is a great providence that, so to speak, waits ahead of us. I know it would be presumptuous to speak as if the suffering that people feel as they pass through the world were not grave enough to make your question much more powerful than any answer I could offer, and so on. Sincerely, John Ames. Well, he forgot he was writing to an ignorant woman. She'd have hated him for remembering. Still, she'd have to study this a little, a book written to her. Lila, if I may. A letter written to her. Then, what was she supposed to do? Write him a letter? She'd shame herself. Those big, ugly words on a piece of tablet paper, nothing spelled right. But then she'd shamed herself before, and he never seemed to mind. Planting her spuds in his flower garden, knocking at his door before the sun was well up to ask him her one question, throwing her arms around him, taking off with his sweater. It should have pained her to remember, but every time she rested her head on that old sweater, she was just glad for it all. She had even thought about putting it in the fire because it worried her how it kept him on her mind. Then maybe she could catch that bus. She certainly did wonder about herself. He should be thinking she's crazy for sure by now. No sign of it in that letter, though. She thought, how can he forget what I am? But she hadn't yet put things right with those people who gave her the chicken. She could spend the morning there and then go down to the river and wash out some of her clothes. She'd better get started. Doan used to say that if you start after sunrise, you've wasted the day. The woman still was just as sickly, so Lila cleaned house for a while, and then she chopped weeds for a while in the kitchen garden, and then when no one was looking, she put the hoe in the shed and walked away. Now they were even. She liked to do her wash. Sometimes fish rose for the bubbles. The smell of the soap was a little sharp, like the smell of the river. In that water, you could rinse things clean. It might be a little brown after a good rain, soil from the fields, but the silt washed away or settled out. Her shirts and her dress looked to her like creatures that never wanted to be born, the way they wilted into themselves, sinking under the water as if they only wanted to be left there, maybe to find some deeper, darker pool. And when she lifted them out, held them up by their shoulders, they looked like pure weariness and regret, like her own flayed skin. But when she hung them over a line and let the water run out and the sun and the wind dry them, they began to seem like things that could live. At the church once they read the story about how the Queen of Egypt came down to a river and found a baby floating in a basket, and after that it was her baby, Liv. The mother was supposed to kill the child, but she couldn't. She put it in the river, and the queen lifted it out. But then it grew up and turned into a man, and he decided he didn't want to be her child. Or maybe she had died and her father didn't take to him, but that's not in the story. Well, Lila thought, I hope she did die before he could treat her that way. She should have been able to trust him. Here I am thinking that way again. Can't trust nobody. That's what I'm thinking all the time. If I'm ever going to try it, it might as well be now, when I can leave if I have to, and I'm still young enough to get by for a while, when it won't much matter if it don't work out. So she'd get herself together as well as she could, walk to the church, to that little room where people came when they wanted to talk to him, and she'd knock on the door, and then she would say to him that she did want to get baptized after all, and she was sorry she forgot to come to them classes. Then he'd say something. She would tell him that was a real nice letter. He'd say something else. And what would any of it amount to? She saw them all talking to each other all the time, laughing. Doll used to say, no cussing, and they would laugh because of all the things they knew and nobody else did. But if you're a stranger just to everybody on earth, then that's what you are, and there's no end to it. You don't know the words to say. She went to Mrs. Graham's to see if she needed help with the ironing, and she did. That took the morning and most of the afternoon. She wanted some things from the store, so she had to walk past the church. He was out in front of it with his hands on his hips, looking up at the roof. But he turned and saw her and said, "Good afternoon." She nodded and kept on walking. He caught up with her and fell into step beside her, a little out of breath. He said, "I'm glad to see you." She said, "Why?" He laughed. "Well, that's what people say sometimes. Besides, I am glad to see you." They walked on like that, right past the store. She said, "Why?" He laughed again. "You ask such interesting questions, and you don't answer them." He nodded. It felt very good to have him walking beside her. Good, like rest and quiet, like something you could live without, but you needed anyway. That you had to learn how to miss, and then you'd never stop missing it. I quit coming to them classes, so I guess I don't get baptized. Yes, I've given that some thought. There are things we do hope the person being baptized will understand well enough to affirm. Affirm? I don't even know that word. I can't half understand that letter you give me. I'm an ignorant woman. Seems like you can't understand that. He stopped, so she did. He looked into her face. "I think I would understand it if it were true, but I don't believe it is, so I don't see the point in acting as if I do." He shrugged, knowing a few words, more or less. "It ain't that simple." He nodded. "It isn't the least bit simple, but if you are at church this Sunday and you want to accept baptism, then I will do it with perfect confidence in the rightness of it. That's all I can say." She said, "I got to get some things at the store." So they turned and walked back into Gilead. He said, "I suppose you still don't trust me at all." "I just don't go around trusting people. Don't see the need." They walked on a while. "The roses are beautiful on the grave. It's very kind of you to do that." She shrugged. "I like roses." "Yes, but I wish there were some way I could repay you." She heard herself say, "You ought to marry me." He stopped still, and she hurried away to the other side of the road, the flush of shame and anger so hot in her this time that surely she could not go on living. When he caught up with her, when he touched her sleeve, she could not look at him. "Yes," he said, "you're right, I will." She said, "All right. Then I'll see you tomorrow." Why did she say that? What was she planning on doing tomorrow? He just stood there. She could feel him watching her. Of all the crazy things she had ever done, it was the feeling that she had had walking along beside him that put the notion in her head. It comes from being too much alone. Things matter that wouldn't if you had a regular life. Just walking along beside that old man past the edge of town, not even talking most of the time, with the cottonwoods shining and rustling and shading the road. She never really looked at him, but he was beautiful, gentle, and solid, his voice so mild when he spoke, his hair so silvery white. If she ever thought of herself marrying anybody, it would have been a man who was young enough not to mind a day's work. Being a preacher was a kind of work, though. And he had that house to live in, gardens around it, gone to weed. What was she thinking about? It was never going to happen. She might be crazy, but he wasn't. She tried to remember that he said those words, "You're right, I will," in a way that really meant, "That's the strangest thing anybody ever said to me in my whole life." It wasn't hard to hear them that way, except from him. He always seemed to say what he meant, near enough. But she could see how it might have been different this time. She lifted the loose plank. She lives in a shed outside of town. She lifted the loose plank and took out the jar where she kept her money. She had the $5 Mrs. Graham paid her, since upset as she was, she didn't trust herself to go into the store and buy the tin of deviled ham she'd had on her mind. So altogether it came to about $45. If she hadn't been buying things, cigarettes, margarine, there'd have been more. Still, $45 would take her a long way on a bus. She could go to California, where there wouldn't be winter to worry about. Crops coming up all year long. Don and Marcel had always talked about going to California. That was a nice thing to think about. She could do it on her own, nobody to trust. She knew he wouldn't come to her place, and she couldn't go to his. He might be looking for her since it was tomorrow, or he might not be looking for her. She would go into town in the next few days to get her ticket, so if he happened to see her, he wouldn't make much of it. She might never know. Maybe he meant what he said, but if he didn't and she saw him again, she wouldn't be able to stand the shame. Or she would. And that would be another harder shame. It would be best if she could just say, "I'm leaving," like I was meaning to do the whole time. So she spent the next day at the river. She sat down on a rock and dropped a fishing line into the water. She had brought her tablet and pencil and her Bible, which she has stolen out of the church. Ezekiel said, under their wings on their four sides they had human hands, and the four had their faces and their wings thus. Their wings touched one another. Each of them moved straight ahead without turning as they moved. As for the appearance of their faces, the four had the face of a human being, the face of a lion on the right side, the face of an ox on the left side, and the face of an eagle. Such were their faces. Don would be saying, "What did I tell you?" But it made as much sense as anything else. No sense at all. If you think about a human face, it can be something you don't want to look at, so sad or so hard or so kind. It can be something you want to hide because it pretty well shows where you've been and what you can expect. And anybody at all can see it, but you can't. It just floats there in front of you. It might as well be your soul for all you can do to protect it. What isn't strange when you think about it? The shadows had moved and the bugs were beginning to bother, so she found a sunnier place. There were huckleberries. If she could only forget why she was there, she'd be fairly pleased with herself. One big old catfish would make it a good day. That letter was in the Bible. She tore it in half and put a rock on it in a wet enough place that the ink would bleed. Dear Lila, if I may. She thought sometimes that if she decided to do it, she could cut off her hand. There was a kind of peace in that, in one way at least. She could trust herself, crazy or not. She might burn that sweater while she was cooking her catfish. She might burn the Bible, for that matter. Old Ezekiel would nestle down into the flames. He seemed to know all about them. The umbrella would fit in her suitcase crosswise. She decided to go to church the next Sunday. If she came late and left early, if she sat in the last pew, she would never be near enough to speak to her. He would never be near enough to speak to her or to pay her any notice. She wouldn't mind seeing him one last time, standing there in the pulpit in the window light, talking to those people about incarnation and resurrection and the rest. She'd hear a little singing. After that, she would never step into a church again. When she came up the bank from the river, she saw him standing in the road, about halfway between her and that damn shack. So there she was, Bible in one hand, catfish jumping on a line in the other, barefoot, and he turned and saw her. He started walking toward her. She couldn't think what else to do, so she waited where she was. He didn't speak until he was close to her, and then he didn't speak, still deciding what to say. He said, "I know you don't like visitors, but I wanted to talk to you. I wasn't actually coming to your house, but I hoped I might see you. I want to give you something. Of course, you are under no obligation to accept it. It belonged to my mother." He was holding it in his hand, a locket on a chain. I should have found a box for it. Then he said, "We spoke about marriage. I haven't seen you since then. I don't know if you meant what you said. I thought I'd ask. I understand if you've changed your mind. I'm old, an old man. I'm very much aware of that. He shrugged. But if we're engaged, I want to give you something. And if we're not, I want you to have it anyway. Well, she said, I got my hands full. He laughed. So you have. Let me take something. A Bible. I stole it. And don't go looking at my tablet. Sorry. Ezekiel. He laughed. You're always surprising. I stole your sweater. Was that a surprise? Not really, but I was glad you wanted it. Why? He said. Well, you probably know why. She felt her face warm. And the fish kept struggling, jumping against her leg. She said, damn catfish. Seems like you can never quite kill him dead. I'm going to just put it here in the weeds for a minute. And there it was, flopping in the dust. She wiped her hands on her skirt. I can take that chain now, whatever it is. He said, excellent, I'm grateful. You should put it on. It's a little difficult to fasten. My mother always asked my father to do it for her. Lila said, is that a fact? And handed it back to him. He studied her for a minute, and then he said, you'll have to do something with your hair, if you could lift it up. So she did, and he stepped behind her, and she felt the touch of his fingers at her neck, trembling, and the small weight of the locket falling into place. Then they stood there together in the road, in the chirping, rustling silence and the sound of the river. He said, so, are we getting married or not? And she said, if you want to, it's all right with me, I suppose. But I can't see how it's going to work. He nodded. There could be problems. I've thought about that quite a lot. What if it turns out I'm crazy? What if I got the law after me? All you know about me is what anybody can tell by looking, and nobody else ever wanted to marry me. He shrugged. I guess you don't know me very well either. It ain't the same. Somebody like me might marry somebody like you just because you've got a good house and winter's coming. Just because she's tired of the damn loneliness. Somebody like you got no reason at all to marry somebody like me. He shrugged. I was getting along with the damn loneliness well enough. I expected to continue with it the rest of my life. Then I saw you that morning. I saw your face. Don't talk like that. I know about my face. I suspect you don't. You don't know how I see it. No matter. A person like you might not want the kind of life she would have with me, people around. It's not a very private life compared to what you're used to. You're sort of expected to be agreeable. I can't do that. He nodded. They're not going to fire me, whatever happens. I'll have my good house till they carry me out of it. I can take care of myself. I know that. I mean, if you're not like most pastors' wives, it won't matter. I've been here my whole life, my father and then me. I won't be here so much longer. No one will want to trouble me or you. He said, you have to understand, I've given this a great deal of thought. What an old country preacher might have to give to a young woman like you, not the things a man her age could give her, a worldlier man. So I would be grateful for anything I could give you, maybe comfort or peace or safety, for a while at least. I am old. She said, you're pretty fine looking, old or not. He laughed. Well, thank you. Believe me, I would never have spoken to you this way if I didn't think my health was reasonably sound, so far as I can tell. He wouldn't have spoke to me like this if I hadn't mentioned it all in the first place. That's true. I'd have thought it would be foolish of me to imagine such a thing, as old as I am. She thought, I could tell him I don't want to be no preacher's wife. It's only the truth. I don't want to live in some town where people know about me and think I'm like an orphan left on the church steps waiting for somebody to show some kindness, so they've taken me in. I don't want to marry some silvery old man everybody thinks is God. I got St. Louis behind me and Tansy tea and pretending I'm pretty, wearing high-heel shoes. Wasn't no good at that life, but I did try. I got shame like a habit, the only thing I feel when I'm alone, except when I'm alone. She said, I don't think we better do this. He nodded. His face reddened, and he had to steady his voice. I hope we will be able to talk from time to time. I always enjoy our conversations. I can't marry you. I can't even stand up in front of them people and get baptized. I hate it when they're looking at me. He glanced up preacherly. Yes, I hadn't thought of that. I should have realized. I haven't always performed baptisms in the church, if there are special circumstances. All I would need is a basin of some sort. I could take water from the river. I can't affirm anything. Then I guess we'll skip that part. I got a bucket, no basin. That will do fine. You wait here, I got to comb my hair. He laughed. I'm not going anywhere. She changed into a cleaner blouse and combed and braided her hair and put on her shoes. She'd do this and think about it afterward. She went out on the stoop and picked up the bucket, which would be clean enough after a rinse. The old man was in the field picking sunflowers. She walked to the road. He brought her his bouquet. I like flowers at a baptism, he said. Now we'll fetch a little water. There was a kind of haste in his cheerfulness. She had hurt him, and he couldn't quite hide it. He took the bucket from her and helped her down the bank as if she hadn't gone down to the river for water 100 times by herself. And he sank the bucket into a pool and brought it up brimming and poured half of it back. The crouching was a little stiff in the standing, and he smiled at her. I am old. I don't need much at all, he said. A few water skeeters won't do any harm. He was dressed in his preacher clothes, and he was careful of them, but he liked being by the river, she could tell. What do you think, up there in the sunshine or down here by the water? Then he said, oh, I left the Bible lying on the grass. I could do it from memory, but I like to have a Bible, you know, the cloud of witnesses. She didn't know. Since there aren't any others, she still didn't know. No matter. He was glad to be doing this, and not just so he could put aside that talk they'd had, so it must mean something. She said, I like the sunshine. He helped her up the bank, and he found the Bible, and he opened it and read, in those days, Jesus came up from Nazareth of Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. And just as he was coming up out of the water, he saw the heavens torn apart and the Spirit descending like a dove on him. And a voice came from heaven, you are my Son, the beloved. With you I am well pleased. These are the words of John, who baptized for the remission of sins and who baptized our Lord. I baptize you with water, but he will baptize you with the Holy Spirit. The sacrament is an outward and visible sign of an inward and spiritual grace. Dying in Christ, we rise in him, rejoicing in the sweetness of our hope. Lila Dahl, but that ain't my name. What is your name? What is your name? Nobody ever said. All right, it's a good name. If I christen you with it, then it's your name. Christen, baptize. All right. Lila Dahl, I baptize you. His voice broke. I baptize you in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, resting his hand 3 times on her hair. That was what made her cry, just the touch of his hand. He watched her with surprise and tenderness, and she cried some more. He gave her his handkerchief. After a while, he said, when I was a boy, we used to come out along this road to pick black raspberries. I think I still know where to look for them. She said, I know where. And the 2 of them walked across the meadow, through the daisies and sunflowers, through an ash grove, and into another fallow field. There were brambles along the farther side weighed down with berries. She said, we don't have nothing to put them in. And he said, I guess we'll just have to eat them. He picked one and gave it to her as if she couldn't do it for herself. He said, we could put them in my handkerchief. I'll hold them. I'll hold it. You will get stains all over it. He laughed. Good. She spread it across his open hands and filled them, and then she tied the corners together. Fragrance and purple bled through the cloth. He said, I'll carry it so it doesn't stain your clothes, but it's for you if you want it. You can steal my handkerchief if you want to remember the day you became Lila Doll. She said, thanks. I figure I'll remember anyway. They walked up to the road. Well, he said, it's almost evening, and we forgot all about your catfish, didn't we? And your Bible and your tablet. I'll help you gather them up. It might rain. Then I'll be going. She said, I was wondering, can you still get married to somebody you baptized? He raised his eyebrows. No law against it. Why do you ask? I don't know. Seems like I just want to rest my head. He said, I'd like that too, Lila, but I think we made a decision. No. She wasn't crying. She couldn't look at him. I want this so damn bad, and I hate to want anything. This? I want you to marry me. I wish I didn't. It's just a misery for me. For me too, as it happens. I can't trust you. I guess that's why I can't trust you. Oh, she said, that's the fact. I don't trust nobody. I can't stay nowhere. I can't get a minute of rest. Well, if that's how it is, I guess you'd better put your head on my shoulder after all. She did, and he put his arms around her. She said, the second you walk off down that road, I'll start telling myself you're gone for good, and why wouldn't you be? And I'll start trying to hate you for it. I will hate you for it. I might even leave here entirely. He said, I expect I'll be having a few sleepless nights myself. A few more, that is. I was thinking, if you moved into town, we could sort of keep an eye on each other, talk now and then. That should make things better. Boughton will marry us. I'll talk to him about it. We'll do it soon, to put an end to the worrying. But don't you wonder why I don't even know my own name? You'll tell me sometime if you feel like it. I worked in a whorehouse in St. Louis. A whorehouse. You probably don't even know what that is. Oh, why did I say that? She stepped away from him, and he gathered her back and pressed his head her head against his shoulder. He said, Lila Doll, I just washed you in the waters of regeneration. As far as I'm concerned, you're a newborn babe. And yes, I do know what a whorehouse is, though not from personal experience. You're making sure you can trust me, which is wise, much better for both of us. I've done other things. I get the idea. He stroked her hair and her cheek. Then he said, I really better go home. If I find a place for you, will you move into town? Yes? And I'll talk to Boughton. Promise you won't be out here trying to hate me, if that's something you can promise. He went off and came back with her Bible and tablet and that muddy catfish, which he had dropped into the bucket along with the bouquet of sunflowers. He said, with a catfish, you just never know. He looked at her asleep. Sleep well, he said, gently, like benediction, as if he meant grace and peace. So now she was going to marry this old preacher. She couldn't see any way around it that would not shock all the sweetness right out of him. Thank you.